Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to talk about the Shadowlands expansion coming in 2020. Got back from Blizzcon a couple days ago, and I wanted to start talking about specifically the systems that we've gotten a bit of idea as to what they're going to be. We haven't specifically gotten a lot of details and nitty-gritty onto it, and that's why I want to start putting up this video and get some speculation rolling on what we'd like to see for the future. First thing, and probably one of the most important things that we've noticed, and one of the first things you'll read, is that Legendaries will be returning in the Shadowlands. They will also be very, very deterministic. So, similar to your punch card that you would have in Mechagon, and we all know how easily farmable those were, you're going to be able to take different pieces of domination armor and be able to slot in whatever kind of legendary effect that you have farmed up. So throughout leveling, throughout going through Torghast, the Tower of the Damned, which we'll talk about a little bit later, you'll be able to pick up the armor, these runes, and Anima power in order to create and forge these legendary pieces. We don't know yet, for example, if there's going to be the restriction on 2 legendaries maximum equipped at any one point in time, but I think it's going to be very likely, as there's sure to be a very wide diversity of different effects, if they're going to be similar to the punch card effect in Mechagon, where you'll be able to farm up a number of different legendary effects, and then you have to prioritize which ones you slot into your domination armor. So with these specific materials, these specific pieces, it also makes you wonder how they're going to balance this around the meta. We noticed in Legion with Legendaries and with the talent setups that were available to tanks, that tanks were very highly self-sustainable throughout the expansion. In some cases, they just didn't need a healer and were easily able to take on many mobs before they needed a little bit of healing assistance. With them gone, BFA tanks are a lot less sturdy, and they will be requiring a lot more focus from their healers in order to survive. When we look at DPS, I don't think it really changes too terribly much, because they start changing and scaling the health of the mobs around a player's increased ability to deal lots of damage. But specifically with healers, since this always affects me quite a bit, I'm curious as to what they're going to do from our perspective. The 2 stories of Legion Legendaries for healers was the utility side, where we got some amazing and cool effects like Zanshi, Shroud of Archbishop Benedictus, where if you died, your Spirit of Redemption would pop up, and if you healed enough, you'd be revived at 100% HP, and it would be a cheat death effect that you could work off of. Everyone loved this one as a Holy Priest, and it was a very cool and powerful effect to be able to bring into a progression environment. But at the end of the day, unless you were using it to be able to get a second potion, which is a marginal benefit at best, it really wasn't giving you enough of an oomph, enough of a power-up compared to effects like Velen's. So with Velen's just being able to massively empower your healing and redirect it to other injured allies, this was by far the best legendary that healers could get, and it was something that had a very marginal effect on your playstyle. Yes, you would every minute and 15 seconds use this with a specific cooldown, but at the end of the day, it was just an empowerment effect. It wasn't something that synergized with your class and made it more powerful. And that's one of the concerns that I have about Legendaries returning, is that the more powerful of a legendary that we have, is specifically those that increase our throughput, the more likely that we are just to be able to massively power creep our way through the expansion. This is harmful because you start getting into certain raids like Antorus, where just one Light's Wrath cast will top off the entire raid, or a Penance cast will top off the entire raid if you have enough atonements out. You start synergizing it with legendaries and greater cooldowns that are increasingly scaling and increasingly improving over time, and that's going to be a fairly toxic situation, because then it starts massively devaluing healers that are not able to put out massive amounts of burst healing, and it starts making damage reduction cooldowns better, because the fights will become more bursty, requiring damage reduction cooldowns like Devotion Aura and Barrier to be able to survive. And wait a minute, even without legendaries, that's the situation that we're in right now in BFA. We got other videos talking about that situation. They're linked in the description below. We can talk about that one all day. But it's something to keep in mind, is how healers can power creep and increasingly be able to top off a health pool throughout the expansion, and the consequences if stamina doesn't scale properly with our healer power. Something to consider, and something we're going to look at very closely when we start having healer legendaries available. Now let's talk about Torghast, the Tower of the Damned. Pretty major system inside the Maw, and this is going to be a scalable dungeon for 1 to 5 players, similar to what we saw from the Horrific Visions. But they'll also be making it so that it's different every single time. It's not a timed mode like Mythic Plus would be, but it's going to be continuously changing, and it's going to be requiring, in their eyes, more strategy and exploration in order to get the best value out of it. You'll also be able to find Anima power throughout the dungeon, AP, for the 3rd time. But it's not infinitely scaling, I think, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But throughout this, your mobs are going to be, the mobs will change, and you'll be getting varying amounts of rewards, and you'll also be using them to get runes to be able to socket into your domination armor to be able to build your legendaries. Throughout this sounds like an excellent system, but it's kind of making me curious as to what they're going to use in the system itself. Since there's not going to be any islands or warfronts, we've seen both of those game modes, those systems in World of Warcraft, heavily developed in order to create AI tech. Whether it's making sure mobs aren't auto-clumping, or making sure that mobs are going to the right areas, attacking the right enemies that they should, but also making sure that they're able to act semi-independently on their own. We saw Jaina, for example, instantly ice block whenever we bloodlusted on her. Are we going to start seeing some sort of AI tech being brought into Torghast, or even into raid bosses or Mythic Plus in the future? If those things have already been developed and are, lying useless at the moment, I think there's a lot of possibility that we start seeing smarter bosses, we start seeing smarter enemies to take on as we increase in difficulty. Because at the end of the day, we're supposed to be kicked out of the tower. We're never going to be able to quite finish it, conceivably. So are we going to start having enemies that are able to counter our abilities, able to dodge our abilities, use cooldowns effectively, and overpower us that way? Or is it just going to be one big guy that just one-shots us and kicks our asses out of the tower? We'll have to see, but I'm very interested in it. Now, speaking of Anima power, let's talk about this a little bit. Earlier I said it's not infinitely farmable, which they say so right here in the interview they had with Wowhead, but it's also a little bit weird as to the specific details on this one. They want you to be able to start grinding early on and picking up these pieces and get a taste for it, and then you're going to be able to have it with you when you go into endgame. So they want you to be able to feel like you're not having to infinitely grind islands, for example, because that's the best way to get AP. But how are they going to make world quests still valuable once you get all the reputation benefits? Is this going to tie into making alts more friendly? Because that was another goal that they had in mind, and specifically want to make sure that alts are able to do world quests. That way, while they're leveling, that way they're able to get a little bit of a foot up on getting any of the reputation recipes that are always out there at the beginning of the expansion, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of other factors that'll be around it. So we'll see. But with that in mind, you're going to be using the Anima powers for soulbinds, and this is going to be similar to some of the artifact trees that we saw previously in Legion, where you bind your soul to a specific ally in one of your covenants, and covenants will be the 4 different factions that you can join in the Shadowlands. So you'll be able to find different beneficial effects. So one of them, if you have higher health than your target, then you'll be able to gain increased critical strike chance against that target. Another one will increase your parry chance, and if you don't know how to parry, then it'll teach you how, and you'll be able to have that baseline ability. So there's a number of them that look to have, from what we've seen so far, very passive effects in terms of increasing crit strike, or survivability, or movement speed, different things like that. Picking a covenant is going to be insanely important out of the 4, and then which ally that you choose to soulbind with is also going to be incredibly challenging to be able to properly math out, and incredibly important throughout the expansion. So I think in the direction they're going with this, there's always going to be a better covenant for a specific boss fight or Mythic Plus. Hopefully we'll get to a point at least where there's going to be 2 or even 3 of the 4 covenants that will be designated as being the most desirable, and the effects between the 2 will be similar enough that you'll be more inclined to choose one covenant and one soulbind ally if you're doing Mythic Plus, and another soulbind and another covenant if you're more focused on raids. We'll have to see, but I know that this is a definite point of concern because there is so much choice and because it's not easily switchable from one covenant to the next. They also sort of leave in the point of using Anima on multiple things. They've hinted that there's some cosmetic effect to it. They've hinted that you're able to go over the cap, or that you'll be able to only spend so much in a week. So is there going to be some system where you'll be able to stock up and then you're only able to spend so much at any one point in time on actual power-up effects? So as an example, you can only spend 1,000 Anima power on soulbinds a week, but if you were to stock up on Anima power, you're more quickly able to switch between soulbinds. So that way you're able to switch between soulbinds for different progression encounters. Once you get one hard boss, like a Lady Ashfane, for example, once you topple her and she's all single target, then you go into a multi-target fight, multi-cleave fight, like Orgrizoa or Queen's Court, and you want to be able to switch to another soulbind. Does that make it that you want to farm more Anima power in advance? That way you could switch your soulbinds more easily? We'll have to see. That's another pain point. That's another interesting point that we have to speculate and we have to kind of think about, because those kind of open the door to say, well, does Torghast become infinitely farmable? They were asked this at Blizzcon and they said they're not quite sure yet. It might be a weekly lockout. Will world quests grant Anima power? Is this another way that you're able to stock up, store them, and then you're going to have the most hardcore players and everybody who wants to follow them stock up on these sorts of powers, and then they'll be able to switch at will? There are all the kinds of different options out there, and it puts more stress on them making sure covenants are going to have equal effects, because there's only so many utility effects that they can use. You jump back to the Anima interview, they said we want to make sure that there's different things that we're going to be able to do. So there's different reasons for us to continue running throughout that content. We want there to be tons of different things you can do. You can do what you want for Anima. Seeming like it's going to be very easy to get and through a variety of sources, but what happens when you get it, or what happens when you've already gotten as much as you need? Is there going to be significant enough things to influence us to continue farming Anima, to be able to buy pets, mounts, whatever, and to continue on, or even consumables as well? That is definitely left open into the air. Now, with no new class announced, the last area of the systems that I want to focus on is class philosophy. So as we're going into it in the Shadowlands, they're bringing back a lot of abilities and a lot of specialized effects that a lot of classes had. Specifically, Paladins getting their auras back, Shamans their totems, Rogues their poisons, and Warlocks their curses. A lot of these abilities just been taken away and removed after a while and focused into specific specs. Another interesting point is, while there is going to be greater class range, every mage will be able to use their entire spell school, priests as well, shadow and light, and then warriors using shields and maces. I think what's most important is to look at the class abilities. Raise Dead, Frost Shock, Consecration, Ursul's Vortex, and Shiv. Now, the most significant one, I think, is going to be the last one. Shiv coming into play. If you're not familiar with it, Shiv was an ability that was removed that allowed the rogues to remove enrage effects. And as it currently stands at the moment, there's only 2 classes in the game that can remove enrage effects: Hunters and Druids. So we're adding another major benefit, another major utility event into the rogue class, which in an expansion, as we're wrapping up, we've begun to see, and seen the entire expansion, how insane they have been for a newly designed Mythic Plus environment, where mobs are more deadly, mobs are more lethal, and they require an increasing amount of melee to be able to have enough kicks and crowd control to deal with. Adding another tool to their arsenal, adding another tool like Ursul's Vortex to Druids for every Druid across the board is quite scary. And I think that this also will highlight which classes over the long-term period of the expansion of the entire game, the 15 years of the game, have just continuously received crowd control tools that have made them insane for current content. And while it's great to bring back old abilities that are iconic, they're also need to make sure they're keeping an eye on what abilities need to be added for those who do not have those tools at their disposal. We've seen in BFA where there's a lot of different ranged DPS classes that you could bring to Mythic Plus, but some of them do have additional mechanics, additional utility they can bring to the table beyond just an AoE stun and a kick that's worse than a melee kick, right? Having to look at some of these things specifically for classes like Shadow Priests, like Warlocks as well, I think is going to be very important going forward into the expansion, especially if they want to stick to the Mythic Plus of BFA, where mobs are increasingly deadly and need constant attention to be able to lock down. If nothing else, this could just completely tear down some of the progression that a lot of classes have had, becoming more viable or finding ways to work around their lack of utility or finding good groups to run around. If they're keeping that format and they're continuing to add old abilities to classes that are already decked out in utility for Mythic Plus, then we're just going to increasingly have an issue, not only for the MDI, but also for the trickle down that will inevitably follow when everyone wants to have that specific designated comp. A lot can happen and a lot can change. They announced today that the 8.3 will not come out until early 2020. My money's on January, but we'll have to see, which would put the release of the expansion, in my opinion, around October or September. The last two expansions in Legion and BFA both released in August, so I think this is likely going to be a 9 to 10 month period of time where we'll be building up, tearing apart every ounce of alpha, beta news that we can, and always stressing over what's going to happen. But anyway, let me know what you guys think. There's so much that can happen, and Shadowlands is off to a roaring start with all kinds of content for us to pick apart and all kinds of interviews to look at. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.